Hello and welcome to Fuel Poverty Action series of monthly learning sessions, Fuel for Thought, from fuel poverty to climate justice, a space to share research and lived experience, tackle lies and clear up confusion on fuel poverty and climate change, as we ask and answer questions with experts, activists and campaigners. Today's session is Plenty of Money, for which we have a panel of speakers from a range of backgrounds and lived experience who'll be answering questions including, is it true that the UK is short of money and all of us must make hard choices to pay for a green transition? Why should we be poorer than a decade ago? Where is our money going? And how can we get it back? I'll be introducing speakers as they come on to talk. And with no further ado, first up, we have Lord Prem Sikka, who is an accountant and academic. He holds the position of Emeritus Professor of Accounting at the University of Sheffield. He's also Emeritus Professor of Accounting at the University of Essex. He's co-founder of the Tax Justice Network, which has given evidence to many parliamentary committees in the EU and the UK. He was an advisor to the Work and Pensions Committee for BHS and Carillion collapse investigations and joined the House of Lords in October 2020. Prem, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. And it's my pleasure to join you. There are 21 people, I can see, 20 people now. I already put somebody off. There are 20 people. Perhaps the future generations will say that a revolution began with 20 people. There was one accountant who was there as well. Maybe we await to see that. I briefly want to talk about why the UK is in such a state as it is, and what could possibly be done about it. So let me provide you with a brief glimpse of what is happening in the UK. Now, we all know UK is the 6th largest economy in the world, but millions of our fellow citizens, members of our families, friends, neighbors, are condemned to a life of hardship. We have 171 billionaires in the UK with a personal wealth of £684 billion. There are huge tax perks available for them. There are no curbs on corporate profiteering, dividends and executive pay. And the result is that the wealthiest 1% in the UK have more wealth than 70% of the population combined. That is incredibly skewed. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation estimates that in early 2023, a single person needed to earn $29,500 a year to reach a minimum acceptable standard of living, and a couple with 2 children needed $50,000 between them. Around 19.2 million people do not meet that threshold in the UK, out of a population of about 67.5 million. That is an incredibly high number for a rich country, that so many of our fellow citizens are deprived of a chance to live a fulfilling life. If we look at the median wage in the UK, it is 29,669. That means at least 50% of the people earn less than that and are well below the Joseph Rowntree Foundation threshold for living a fulfilling life. The average house is now priced in the UK at $355,000 and is beyond the reach of the average earner. They simply cannot afford it. They are even struggling to buy food and other essentials. And on the other hand, our government is very keen to push people on to private provision for the healthcare. Of course, it can't be delivered. In the UK today, work doesn't pay enough. And I'm saying that on the day, some of you would have noticed that the chief executive of Currys, who collected 2.2 million last year in pay, is saying that the minimum wage is too high. Government should not increase it. if you earn a minimum wage, you are surviving. You're not really living a decent life. 38% of the people in the UK have their income topped up through universal credit, and they're at work. Low and middle income families are queuing up at food banks, and I visit many. We have 2,600 of them. In 2022, almost 11,000 people in England were hospitalized with malnutrition. Scurvy and rickets have returned to the UK. Some 6.3 million people are in fuel poverty, and that would obviously get worse as the domestic energy prices are set to rise. Some 19 million adults, that is 40% of the UK's adult population, has income of less than 12,570. Just think about it. Majority of those are women. The full state pension in the UK is around 50% of the minimum wage, and not all retirees actually get it. Every year, 93,000 people, which includes 68,000 retirees, die from poverty. That is 93,000 a year. During the Second World War, Luftwaffe bombing from 1939 to 1945 killed 70,000 civilians. So that gives you a sense of what on earth is happening in the UK. Between 2012-2018, 335,000 excess deaths occurred in the UK attributable to austerity. That is 48,000 a year. Between 2018 and 2022, 1.5 million people in England died while waiting for hospital appointments. That is 300,000 a year. This is what is happening in our country. Children are condemned to poverty. Around 4 million children are living in poverty. The government refuses to give them free school meals, and it is saying it can't afford to spare a couple of £1 billion. And just to bear in mind that in the last 5 years, £45 billion of subsidy has been handed to rail companies, but the government is unwilling to provide £2 billion to prevent child hunger. So why are these things actually happening? Now, I've written about this, and my argument is that in the late 1970s, a right-wing coup began, and that has actually been accelerating. And its aim has simply been to weaken the progressive forces, to make capital, as it were, more profitable. And it has shown quite a willingness to take away our civil liberties, our rights, and it is really a dire state of affairs. So in the UK, progressive institutions have been incredibly weakened. Who could have resisted this onslaught on the working class? Let me just give you an example of trade unions. Broadly speaking, in our society, democratic societies, trade unions exercise two kinds of power. That is market power and political power. Both have been seriously eroded. Market power depends on the extent of membership, and that shapes the terms on which unions can negotiate with employers to secure better working conditions, pay and pensions. In 1979, UK trade unions had nearly 13 million members and covered 55.4% of the workforce. Today, under the weight of anti-trade union laws, it is around 6.25 million, that is, the members, and only about just over 22% of the workforce is a member of the trade unions. Workers' ability to squeeze concessions from employers has now been further worsened by the Strikes Minimum Service Levels Act 2023, which Parliament has just passed, and that means millions of workers will no longer be able to go on strike action. If they do, they will be sacked without any recourse to courts. There is nothing. So the government is actually overriding the courts, the ministerial judgments. So in that context, what kind of leverage will workers actually have over intransigent employers? The answer is probably none. And of course, we live in a country where we have single interest organizations, whether they're focused on workers, retirees, children, fuel poverty, homeless, and other causes, there is very little collaboration amongst these organizations to mobilize social imagination and tackle the challenges that we are all facing. The loss of trade unions' market power has been accompanied by the loss of what I also call political power, as the Labour Party has increasingly distanced itself from trade unions and working class concerns. Political parties and too many legislators are funded by corporations and the rich. Of course, the rich and corporations don't donate money, they invest. They want a return, and the return is new riches, compliant laws, lax regulation, and the result is a population that struggles to survive and increasingly is expected to be docile and compliant. The outcomes are only too evident. We have never-ending austerity, real cuts in wages, pensions and benefits, NHS queues hitting 7.7 million. There is now criminalization of protests. That is just some of the examples of what has happened in our country. Rich have got richer. For example, wages are taxed at a marginal rate of 20 to 45%. And if you earn a wage, you also pay national insurance. But the return on investment of wealth is not taxed at the same rate. It is taxed at a lower rate. Capital gains arising from the sale of second homes, artworks, antiques, shares, securities are taxed in the range of 10 to 28%. Dividends are taxed at the rate of 8.7% to 39.35%. The recipients of capital gains and dividends pay zero national insurance, even though they use the National Health Service and can benefit from the use of social care. They're totally exempt from this. So, for example, by aligning taxation of investment income with wages, the government could raise probably around 35 to 40 billion pound a year, but it does not wish to tackle the tax perks of the wealthy. In 2021, that is the latest data we have, the government handed 67.3 billion of tax relief on private pension contributions. 58% of that went to just 4.7 million people, and the remaining 48% is shared by 27 million people paying tax at a rate of 20%. That is the basic rate. And those with incomes less than 12,570, i.e. poorly paid, who really need pensions when they retire, they get zero tax relief. They get absolutely no state help whatsoever, even if they auto-enroll. So by giving everyone tax relief or credit at the same rate of 20%, the government will have 14.5 billion spare, which it could use in a whole variety of ways. Since 2010, between 450 billion and 1,500 billion of tax in the UK has not been collected due to evasion and avoidance. The government is now the government is not putting the bank accounts of lawyers, accountants, and bankers crafting the tax dodges under surveillance, but it is now taking powers for constant snooping, 24/7, 365 days a year, snooping of the bank accounts of benefit receivers, which includes pensioners. Now, that is where we are. So we really need to break the hold of corporations and the rich on political institutions. Without that, there is no possibility of emancipatory change. We also need to unite and support each other in every way that we can. Because if one person's bank account is snooped at, one person's benefit is taken away, one person's wages are frozen away, the rest will just simply, it's going to happen to the rest as well. So we need to unite and support each other so that everyone can live a fulfilling life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prem, for speaking to the staggering inequality in the UK. Yes, the loss of political power that we have, that we all have, I guess, as workers, and also, yeah, the billions of the billions that are lost or not recouped not even an attempt to recoup billions from people who can afford to pay their tax, and while others are being snooped on, who barely can afford to heat their homes. Next up, we have Ben Martin, who will be speaking. So Ben Martin is from Payday, a network of men campaigning with the global women's strike. Payday has particularly supported refuseniks and opposed military spendings and pollution. And Ben Martin is going to speak a little bit more about public money and military spending. After you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. That's a great panel and a great meeting. I think it's the issue you're putting on the table are very important. I think we're all aware of what's going on in Palestine, and certainly the worldwide opposition to it. And for me, this is a sign that people are rejecting the military, rejecting the genocide, rejecting the war, which is great, because we need to build a movement, and it's by building a movement that we could tackle the waste of resources and money that the military is really representing. I'm not going to bombard you with tons of figures, but I'm going to try to show that when we say there is plenty of money, then that this money is spent in the military against our will. We have to see a bit broader, because it has other consequences of the military that we don't always see. Often when we talk about military expenditure, we think about tanks, cannons, bombs, missiles, and so on. And it's true. The UK is the largest arms producer in Western Europe. So there's a lot of resources that are spent in producing that. You're all aware of Trident, for example, in the UK, which is a system, a deterrent, supposedly, which have never been used. And the cost of it is just astronomical. We're talking about, CND has put a label of £200 billion for this atrocity that is never going to be used, one hope. Anyway, this is bigger than the whole budget of the NHS. So there are plenty of money, but that money, as said, and as I think most people are now agreeing, is wasted in that. But the argument is also that the military is creating costs that by the destruction it make, and by the pollution as well, we realize that the money wasted is far bigger. For example, we know that let's take the pollution to start with. The biggest polluter in the world is in fact the US military. And when I talk about pollution, I'm not just talking about carbon emission, but I'm talking all the pollution. I mean, the US has 800 bases across the world. So that's no surprise that they are such a big polluter. Carbon emission, uranium, they've been using uranium in the Iraq war. They've been using uranium in the Ukraine war, and that was provided. In fact, the UK minister for the state have said that they were providing ammunition, including what they call armor piercing, that contain depleted uranium. Well, obviously, once the arm is done, the arm is not done, because the level of cancer that we have seen in Iraq, for example, and that we will see in Ukraine, and that we will see elsewhere, is enormous. So these are also costs. You know, how much is it going to cost in terms of health? A lot of this health care will be done inevitably for free by women. We know that women in the world make most of the healthcare is done by women for free. more than what the institution like the NHS or the equivalent in other country is providing. So these are our costs as well that we should consider when we look at the military and the kind of costs that it involves. I was talking about the destruction as well. Obviously, in a sense, the military is creating new market by destroying infrastructure and people, and so the rebuilding is creating, new market for cooperation to do that. But we also realize, I think Iraq was a point in case that the military is also has been there to protect, especially those oil and gas company. We know that was the case in Iraq. We now know that it's the case in Palestine. There was a very interesting article in The Ecologist. Thank you, Ruth, for sending that around to me. That showed that in the West Bank, but also in the coast, in the sea, the other side of Gaza, there is oil and petrol, though. So we can understand the motivation of the Israeli state in grabbing the land to have access at these resources as well. What do we do? I mean, people have been campaigning against the military. There's now quite a sizable anti-war movement, which we hope will develop around the issue of Gaza, but it's also, we hope, around more generally a rejection of that kind of utilization of our resources. So the anti-war movement is very important. We have also campaigned in Payday to press for the support to refusenik, because we think that one of the way that we could stop the war, that we could stop the production of these weaponry, is by supporting those who refuse to do that killing work. But also working with the Global Women's Strike, we've been supporting a care income for people and planet, which means that whatever happened, we have to count the cost. And so by costing, what the impact of military policy are, for example, we could see the magnitude of that money that is available and that we don't have access to. So we are campaigning for a care income, so that the money that's been used for the military is used for caring and not killing. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Yeah, not just for speaking to how much money is spent on the military, and I guess could potentially be available for other things which are not, like you say, not killing, but caring. And yeah, for speaking to the environmental cost as well of that military spending, which I think is a really great segue into what Alex Chapman has to say to us today. So Alex is the senior economist at the New Economics Foundation, working on environmental and sustainability issues, and will be talking to us a little bit today about the money that is spent in the public money, public and non-public money that is spent on fossil fuels.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I work for the New Economics Foundation. If you're not familiar with us, we're a non-party political charitable think tank. It's been around since the 80s, focused on proposing a new economics, a more sustainable and more equitable economics. And amongst the many things that we campaign on, one of the things that we campaign on is what we call the National Energy Guarantee, which I know well, we share some aims of many of the members of this network, which calls for a free or at least extremely low cost band of energy, which is provided to everyone to satisfy their essential energy needs, recognizing that energy is, of course, one of life's essentials and should not be a traded market good. But of course, when you propose a policy like that, what you always get and what you'll always hear is, well, how are you going to pay for it? We could talk about all sorts of issues here, and I mean, You know, even at a time when the NHS is on its knees, the other day, Rishi Sunak still managed to find the money to announce a national insurance tax cut. So it seems that when tax cuts are involved, money can be found, but when providing essential services, suddenly it disappears. But I'd like to focus today on one particular aspect of how money is moves around our economy. And I think one thing that's important to keep an eye on is that during periods of crisis, as we probably all know, and if everyone remembers the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, they will remember dearly that when we're in periods of crisis, it's important to follow the money. Because when things are disrupted and you know, chaos ensues, usually there are groups of people who are doing very well, and sometimes not enough of a light is shone on their behaviors because of distractions amongst the crisis situation. Now, when it comes to the oil and gas industry, I don't think that's been hidden away. I think it's been fairly clear, some of the stuff that's gone on there. I mean, there was so much pressure when the oil and gas industry were running all the way to the bank with their billions following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that a windfall tax of some sort was going to be needed on their profits. And that was after some political pressure effectively won from the Tories. Initially, they announced an increase in the tax rate on oil and gas companies in the North Sea from 40% to 65%, and then a few months later up to 75%. Now, that's framed as a high windfall tax rate, but I think it's important to note that you only have to go back 10 or 15 years, and that tax rate on North Sea oil and gas was actually just the standard rate, not the windfall tax rate. And if you go today to Norway, that's the standard rate that's paid. But anyway, we had an increase in the tax rate, at least nominally. However, at the same time, some may have seen mentioned, although it hasn't been particularly high profile, at the same time as announcing that, the government also announced a new capital allowance, investment allowance associated with the tax. And what that allowance essentially meant is that if a oil and gas company made a capital investment, which might include something such as a new oil platform, a new rig in the North Sea, or a new pipeline, or whatever it might be, a capital investment, then 91% of the value of that investment overall, taking all the reliefs and generous packages that have been offered to the industries, then 91% of its value can be deducted from their corporation tax bill. And at the time, some people said, well, this sounds a bit odd. But of course, now, a year or two on, we have the ability to look at the data and find out actually what happened as a result of that, and what is unfolding now, and what will continue to unfold over the next year or two while extremely high profits are being made. So what we did in our most recent analysis was to look at the amount of tax relief first that the oil and gas industry in the North Sea is likely to make over a 3-year period between 2023 and 2026. And we put the total value of that tax relief around £18 billion. Now, that's a combination of a group of different reliefs that the industry gets. And what that means is essentially of the total tax amount that the industry would have paid, or the extra amount that they should have paid as a result of the windfall tax, it's likely that more than half of that will actually not be paid, because it will be claimed against this new loophole, if you like, this tax relief. So, you know, you might observe, therefore, that actually the oil and gas companies will be able to protect the majority of the profits that they make through this crisis, which, from an economic logic point of view, just doesn't stand up. So what we've seen over the last few years is fundamentally a distortion of the market. This is not capitalism at play. There was a distortion resulting from the war, and suddenly a huge volume of money flowed into one particular sector in the economy through no particular, you know, it wasn't some clever maneuver they made, some clever business move. It just went there as a result of events. And what the role of government in that situation is of course to correct the market and to correct for the failure that has just taken place and to rebalance where the flows of cash are in the economy. And of course, what we saw in other countries, for example, take Spain, is that they took a much stronger line, tighter controls on energy prices, tighter windfall taxes. Of course, the companies in Spain didn't like it. They took the government to court, but they lost. And what you then ultimately saw was that the inflation rate in Spain came down much faster than it did in the UK. They had it back to almost normal levels almost a year ago now. And it's still lower than it is today in the UK. Of course, the effects of our weak approach to this mean that the prices remain high. Vast profits continue to occur in the oil and gas industry, but also interestingly in the banks, another area where the Spanish government placed the windfall tax, which we have just not touched at all, which essentially comes from the fact that the banks are making huge amounts of money out of the high basic interest rate at the moment that the Bank of England has set. That money is still accruing there. Furthermore, though, there's some even more potentially damaging effects of this windfall tax. Now, the bizarre thing, and something that I find strange, because to me it seems somewhat un-Tory, if you like. It seems something that wouldn't be acceptable to most sort of, I suppose, classical Tories. Is that actually what you create by putting this huge discount essentially on the cost of capital investment is an incentive for businesses to invest in things that are not actually efficient investments, not profitable investments if they were normally invested in. So, you build an oil rig, it has a huge upfront cost and then it pays you back over time. Now, if you take an oil rig that would not pay itself off, then they shouldn't be doing it. But because they can now get this huge discount on their tax bill if they make that investment, there's actually an incentive to invest in unprofitable business endeavors, which is only possible because the state is picking up 91% of the capital investment bill effectively, which is just completely counterproductive and not helpful. Incidentally, you can make a sort of similar argument about the capital allowances that were announced a month ago in the latest autumn statement. Anyway, we now know that a very large sum of money is not going to be claimed as a result of the windfall tax, and that distortion in the market will continue. Meanwhile, as we all know, the population of Britain will continue to suffer from high energy prices over the winter with essentially no support. We would argue that a reduced or free energy allowance should have been offered and could have comfortably been paid for by a proper windfall tax on companies in the North Sea. But of course, longer term, I suppose, we all hope that there will not be tax revenue from the North Sea because it won't be needed, because we'll be a decarbonised economy, will have moved away onto renewable energies and the like. However, by the time we reach that point, we would also hope that the homes of the UK have been insulated to a higher standard, that renewable energy has been brought down in price, and the subsidies that would currently be needed from the North Sea sector to subsidise something like a national energy guarantee, like that free band of energy, won't be needed because the system will be sustainable in its own design. So that's a little bit, I know, somewhat pessimistic update on the state of the world, but I think it's important to keep an eye on where the money is flowing, and potentially to put pressure on any future administration of whatever party that might be that's going to run this country to start rebalancing the taxes and the allowances in the system in favour of protecting people's essential needs. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Alex. What can I say? I'm just staggered by, again, the number of billions that we've just gone through in just this one talk, just from many different angles. Up next, we have Chia Harrington, FPA's lead organizer, who will be talking a little bit about what FPA has in stock for upending energy pricing.
Hey, thank you, Mal. So yeah, because there is plenty of money, FPA calls for energy for all, and we have our Energy for All manifesto. And so, similar to the new Economics Foundation, we believe that each household should receive free essential energy to cover their essential needs, and that this energy will be paid for by higher tariffs on luxury energy use and through windfall taxes on the fossil fuel corporations, and by recouping millions which are now spent subsidising the fossil fuel industry. We also believe that the UK housing should be brought up to standard where people aren't being made ill by their homes, but we want to make sure that when they are insulated, that they are insulated with safe, non-flammable, non-toxic insulation. And yeah, to make sure that people, when they are paying their energy bills, that energy is actually used to keep themselves warm, not just escaping and heating the planet. We want to ban the forced installation of prepayment meters, because we don't think it's right that people can have their homes broken into just so that these companies can squeeze money out of people in debt when there is so much money available to cover people's essential energy needs anyway. And yeah, we're totally against the forced disconnection away from energy. No one needs to be disconnected when there is money to pay for everyone's energy. I think what makes us there's a few differences with like our organization and what we're pushing for, and that we also argue for abolishing the standing charge. We don't think that people should have, like, in the same way people wouldn't pay for the right to eat, we don't think that people should pay for the right to heat their homes. And so why should people have to pay extra money before they're even paying for their energy bills? We believe that if that was totally gotten rid of, people have more money to go towards their energy bills. And yeah, we want a pricing revolution. We think it's totally wrong that people who use the least amount of energy are usually paying the most for it, and that needs to change. And yes, as renewable energy is also cheaper, that should be prioritized over expensive fossil fuels. And yeah, so that's Energy for All, and there's many different ways you can get involved with fuel poverty action and pushing the manifesto. So I'll share links in the chat next about a few of the things I'm about to mention. But basically, you can push our Energy for All manifesto to an organisation you're part of or a faith group or community group. You can also bring it to your trade union branch if you're a part of a trade union. You can also sign up to our mailing list to find out more about what FPA is doing. You can be invited to our monthly meetings, which also tell you a bit more about how you can get involved directly with some of our work. We also have many different ways you can take action, which you can see on our website. You can order stickers to raise awareness about the Energy for All campaign. You can also, there's a few letter writing actions at the moment. You can write letters to your MP about Energy for All. You can also write letters about abolishing the standing charge as well. And yes, for more information, do go to our website or contact our email to find out other ways you can get involved in the new year.
Thank you very much for that, Gia. Brilliant roundup of Energy for All. Yeah, I've linked a few of those things you were talking about in the chat already, but feel free to add more. And last but not least, we have Erin Browning, who is the FPA organizer for the Glasgow hub, who is just going to talk a little bit more about why such a scheme policy as Energy for All and the energy pricing guarantee is so important. It's just so important. Erin.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. It's great to see everyone here. Just going to speak a little about my experience with fuel poverty before kind of linking that into the rest of the nation. Kind of always had a bit of a strange relationship with it in the sense that it's never been me that paid the bill. So I saw it from a child's perspective. as I then grew into adulthood. Saw like my mum struggling with energy bills, having to like rebalance what bills could or could not be paid. Remember a few winters it was weird, like we joke about the fact we could see our breath in the kitchen. But like looking back now, we could see our own breath inside our house. That wasn't a dignified way to live. It's not something anyone should be looking at themselves and seeing. Home is where you come in to stay warm, you know? Beyond that, you know, it's seeing the stress that my mum was going through between like having to rejig bills and whatnot. I must have been like what 12 or 13 when I first kind of really started to notice that. But it really does hit you when you realize that you are in poverty. It's not a nice thing, you know. Now, like I say, we got quite lucky there. We were just trying to balance, you know, which bill we could pay in full and which bill we could not. That's very lucky in comparison to how some people are struggling with energy. You know, at that time there was people who were struggling to whether they could pay any of the bills or if they could afford food. They were having to weigh one up against the other. Now the situation's gotten so bad that there's people who are looking at what they have and what they need to pay and saying, I can't afford food or my bills. We were very lucky in the sense that we didn't have to make those harder choices. Not everyone else has been that lucky, and it's less and less people are being that lucky now. I mean, looking at statistics, from the low income, low energy efficiency report last year put out by Westminster, over 10% of people in England are living in fuel poverty. It's about 6 million people. Then you look at Scotland, and that jumps to over 35%. It's over a third of people in Scotland living in fuel poverty, going through the same kind of positions that I was, or worse. And we know quite a lot of them are going worse. 2,424 excess winter deaths last year in Scotland. Over 500 of those were solely from cold homes. The answer as to why we need energy for all is simple. Without it, people are dying. People are dying at a terrifyingly fast rate for what this issue is. It is the only way this gets solved. And that's kind of also all I've got to say on the matter. This stops people dying.
Thank you very much for that, Erin. Yeah, always very important to bring a human perspective to everything that has been spoken to this evening, and why it's so important that that we know that there is plenty of money. It means that the people who hold the levers to it are not doing enough to prevent people from dying, as you just said. So thank you very much for that. We're now going to move into the second part of the session, where I hand over to you, our wonderful participants and audience, for your reflections, stories, questions, and comments. I'm going to allow everyone to unmute, but if you'd like to come in, you please raise your virtual hand. You might just be able to see the icon for that, or if you can't, click on the three dots at the bottom right of your Zoom window, scroll to reactions and click raise hand. If you prefer to type what you want to say, I'll also be monitoring the chat and I'm happy to read out your words. Prem, Ben, Alex, Chia, and Erin, feel free to just come in if you feel like the question is something you can answer to. Here we go. Who wants to? Someone like to start us off? Ruth, I see you're unmuted already. Oh, Richard, we've got a hand up. Yeah, Richard, go for it.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I haven't been able to follow this meeting 100%, but I do get what you're all saying, and I find it appalling that our corrupt government apparently have money for war and other things, but not to help its own citizens. And hearing about so many people forced onto prepayment meters, get disconnects and so on, I swear to Christ, this is this is Britain at its worst point since I was born. And last year, the care home where I was living at the time, as I explained in the chat, wanted me and my then housemate to each pay an extra £100 per month towards utilities, but if I agreed to that, I'd have to start getting my food from food banks. They clearly didn't care. They just wanted us to pay bills and do chores. It was awful, that place. And I was only there because the flat where I had near my parents happens to be a fire risk. Thankfully, I finally got to move out of that care home in March. I'm now living in a flat close to my parents' place, but not as close as my last flat. But even so, it's clear that privatised residential care and privatised energy are not working, and both need to be taken back into public ownership.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. Does anyone want to come into that, say something about that? Prem, yes?
I actually agree with what Richard is saying, but let me sort of add, before I say a bit more, all the problems that various speakers have identified and Richard has identified, there is nothing inevitable about them. There's nothing preordained. They are the outcome of politics and power in our society. There's whether we look at social care or energy, we have to remember they were all privatized. So in social care, private equity has now moved in even worse. So every pound of public money that is handed to social care, 30 to 40% is vanishing in profits. Profits are not just what these companies declare, they're also sucking out monies through intra-group transactions, borrowing money from their offshore haven affiliates. They're effectively paying interest to themselves. Our water companies are doing that too. And so this obsession with privatization has added to the problem. But the question we have to ask ourselves, why are governments obsessed with these things? Privatizations, subsidies for rail companies, subsidies for car makers, subsidies for oil and gas companies who are getting huge subsidies. But when it comes to alleviating poverty, we can't afford it. I think it is to do with the wholesale capture of our institutions of government, political system by corporations and the rich. Now, of course, not all rich necessarily want to do this. In the House of Lords, I hosted a seminar by patriotic millionaires. Some of you would have heard of that group. They're basically saying, please tax us more. We are the richest people. We don't ask to get rich. You keep on giving us tax cuts. You jacked up interest rates, and at a stroke, we become rich. We don't really need this. Could you please tax us more? Now, the government, would not actually do that. So the government, as I said, there are lots of wealthy, rich individuals, corporations. They are funding political parties, funding individual legislators, and they want a return. And this is the kind of return they get. And we could bring all the utilities into public ownership, probably at very little cost. If you look at the water companies, all you have to do is enforce the environmental standards, and you find their profit has actually vanished, and they are basically bust. Just in this week, there was a hearing in the House of Commons on the Thames Water's finances. Thames Water's accounts, if you look at, I haven't got time to go through that now, but if you look at them, you will find they are full of financial engineering, inflating their profits so that they can pay higher dividends. And they are also shifting profits through intra-group transactions to reduce their tax bill. So if we were to enforce environmental standards, these organizations would largely be bust. You can take over them at very, very little cost. Railways, £45 billion in the last 5 years. And the result is what? People don't own a single seat in a single carriage, never mind the whole trains. I asked in Parliament, the minister, I said, why don't you demand an equity stake in any company to which you provide public money? At least if those so-called foul steel companies or anybody else does well, you can, you can get a return, or even if they must sell, as the Tories want to sell the shares, well, you'll have something to sell. At the moment, you hand money, you've got no guarantee of jobs, no guarantees like with oil and fossil fuel companies. Earlier on, Alex referred to their capital allowances. They're not in return required to sell the output from North Sea in the UK. They can sell it anywhere, despite getting the subsidies here. But the minister, I think, was absolutely bamboozled by this question that there was free money. I don't think he actually recovered from that question for the whole debate. But they're just addicted to giving free money. So this is kind of highly dysfunctional state. That is what we have. Okay? And the narratives you've got to look at, the narrative is the poor are the burden, the disabled, the sick, the elderly are the burden, the public services are the burden. We are threatened by trade unions, they say, by workers. But it is never the other side to say, what are the obligations of corporations? What are the obligations of the rich? And it's those kind of narratives, I think, which we got to delegitimize. We got to somehow render the familiar unfamiliar. That is, I think, what we need to do in order to pave the way for emancipatory change. And I am in Parliament, and in my view, Parliament is highly corrupt. And I'm on public record for saying that. One political parties are, taking all kind of money willy-nilly, and they're taking money from the rich people too. And there are so many temptations. Since I've been in the House of Lords for 3 years, I've lost count of the number of directorships I've been offered ever since, and invited to, free dinners and free trips here and there. I have not taken any because I rather join meetings like this and speak up. I don't want to be in their pockets. But look at our politicians. They go to kiss the hand of Rupert Murdoch and say, is it okay for me to be Prime Minister? They assure the rich we won't tax you more. So please, is it okay for me to be Prime Minister or in government? Do they meet homeless people? Do they meet hungry people? They don't. So our politics is entirely broken. Until we mend that, there's very little chance of emancipatory change.
Thanks a lot for that, Prem. And yeah, on narratives, well, it strikes me from what you said how, the poor people are always, or people on benefits are always characterized as being given handouts when, as you say, that's exactly what's happening with companies to make more profit. Ruth, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I can't follow that really, but I wanted to pick up on something that Benoit began to expose, which is when we say plenty of money, some of it doesn't even take the form of money. Some of it is money that would exist or could exist, but it's wasted resources. For instance, the cost to health when we have pollution is not counted in the costs of polluting industries or the military, but it is actually a cost. And if we didn't have that pollution, we would have more money. So there's all this unseen money that doesn't exist yet. And actually, I think if you look at the whole economy, that waste is probably the biggest part of the economy, of the commercial economy, not the care economy, which is what's never counted, but of the stuff that actually comes into the market. Waste seems to be, I think, probably the majority, because you have to take account of, for example, built-in obsolescence, where things have to be made again and again because they're made to throw away. You know, fashion is the more visible part of that, but the rest of it is everything just breaks down and needs replacing. Adverts, one of the big things that we pay through our energy bills is the energy companies advertising and, you know, backing football teams to get popular. Why is their commercial interest something that we should have to pay for? The military itself, and then even within military expenditure, a lot of that is actually corruption, and nobody is looking at that. The use of cars instead of public transport, which, you know, we don't need all these little boxes, more waste. The health costs, not only from people being cold, but from the high prices that the pharmaceutical companies choose to charge, and the fact that we're all stuffed full of medications that we don't necessarily need because that's what they prefer to preventative medicine or other forms of medicine. And I think if we look at it all, and I don't know anybody who has actually done this analysis, we'd find that actually we didn't really need to work very much now. You know, given that technology is so strong, why are we all spending our lives jumping up and down just to do things just to make profit and despoil the earth and create costs that otherwise wouldn't exist? And I think you know, part of the philosophy of energy for all and other similar things is that if we actually start with need, you can get away from some of that. And so that's what we're trying to do. So sorry if that's a bit long.
Benoit, would you like to come in?
Ruth is right. I mean, I remember there was a statistic, which is quite old, but I'm sure it's quite true, that women do 2/3 of the world work for 5% of the income and 1% of the assets. And for me, it's always been a very, very revealing statistic, because it really shows all the unwaged work, all the invisible costs that Ruth talk about, that we have to begin to make visible if you want to see not only the magnitude of what we're facing, but also the possibilities that it show us. You know, when we start campaigning to demand money for the work that is now unwaged, because this work has been imposed on us by pollution, by the military, by the way the society is organized, when we start demanding wages for this unwaged work, we begin to fight for what's ours and to get back that money that has been stolen from us. I think Prem has explained it very well. You know, there's a lot of theft around. There's a lot of theft by corporation, by government. This is our money because we create the value in this society. And we have to see all of that that we are producing, and we have to demand the money for it.
Thanks a lot, Ben. We have a hand up from Reynard.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for the speakers. I mean, I agree with what has been said, but I think the challenge is, I assume most of the people in this call are probably already convinced. How do we get the message out to the people who are doubtful or not interested? Because, I mean, it appears that the sort of media and politicians like to blame immigrants, migrants, for all the problems, lack of health services, lack of social housing. And as the speakers have said, there's plenty of money around to improve services. But unfortunately, the message doesn't seem to get through to the sort of critical mass of people of sort of people who are not terribly interested in politics and economic issues. So I would like to just find out whether the speakers have any good ideas how to reach out to them. What are the best ways to sort of get these people and overcome the sort of mainstream media propaganda? Thank you.
Gia.
Okay, so at FPA we're trying to do this all the time, and I guess one way is through hosting our educationals, by trying and inviting people to them. So we're countering these narratives, but there's also many different kind of tactics we try to push this. I mean, we believe that for change to happen, it should happen. It probably will happen through like a grassroots mass movement, and how you create that is a constant question and challenge that we're trying to push towards. But as part of that, this winter we hosted warm-ups across the UK where people occupied space in their local area or targeted energy companies, and highlighted that if it's too cold in our homes, we're going to warm out here. And that was an act of public action, bringing that and trying to raise the public consciousness about these kind of issues by getting in the media, by taking action. And so on top of all the kind of work we're doing constantly through lobbying and organizing many different forms, there is this kind of this tactic of public mass action that we're also trying to encourage, and we've been very successful at pushing that through the trade union movement this year, through our relationships with Unite Community, and through also our other relationships with organizations like DPAC, and also other climate activist groups who all got involved. But there's many ways, I'm sure, to push this kind of change too.
I think what she has said is highly exemplary, and the organization is wonderful, and she's absolutely right. As I always say, we've got to try to render the familiar unfamiliar. That way you reconstruct people's common sense, is very kind of a Gramscian phrase. I have always been a great fan of Gramsci's writing. For an accounting academic, I integrated Gramscian work in accounting, teaching, and research as well. So that was something. But let me just put it in broader sort of a context. Our predecessors managed to win lots and lots of social rights, which we enjoy today. Against all the odds, they managed to secure some change. They used oratory, leaflets, music, theatre, plays. They enacted plays in street corners, little, things enacted on stages, anything to, as it were, to mobilize people. So you basically have to inform, educate, and entertain. All these three things have to be done simultaneously. So against all the odds, change can be secured. Nothing is really lost. At the moment, in the latest phase of this kind of a class war, working class is on the losing side, but it need not be. There is nothing to say that always has to be the case. But the irony is that without the working class, capital itself can't really flourish. Like I said earlier today, the boss of Curry saying, oh, minimum wage is too high. But if I was to sit down with him and I would say, look, how on earth are you going to sell your products if people don't have enough money? Who's going to come to your shop? How are you going to get your executive pay? How are your shareholders going to, do this? But the problem is, for the last 40, 50 years, we have been suppressing workers. So in 1976 in the UK, workers' share of the GDP in the form of wages and salaries was 65.1%. Today, it is close to 50%. And the biggest beneficiary from that decline is capital. Taxes have been fairly steady, though this year, tax take as percentage of GDP has gone up. Otherwise, it's hovered around about 33%, even in the days of Margaret Thatcher. So there's been a huge transfer of wealth from workers to capital. The state itself has been unloading debt, public debt, onto ordinary households. Take the example of student debt. Not so long ago, people didn't pay fees to go to university. Now there's £206 billion of student debt, which would have actually been added to public debt. Not really surprising, people are poor. So, you graduate, you can't get a decent job, and whatever wage you earn, you're going to pay the graduate debt, income tax, everything else. You got little left. Why on earth would you want to start a family? You can't even buy a home, unless you're earning more than 50,000 a year. Nobody wants to lend you any money to buy a house. So I'm just saying, state has been restructured. So we got to constantly rethink how we respond. We can't respond in the old ways, but we can learn lessons as to what kind of strategies and tactics they used in order to secure some change. And that is why I was saying earlier that we seem to have single interest, single cause organizations, whether it is the FPA, trade unions, Shelter, somebody else. We all need to combine our forces. We need to join up because we are up against corporations who may compete, but they actually have common interests. They want subservient political parties. They want a state which serves their interests. So we won't get anywhere unless we also combine.
Thank you very much for that, Prem. I think it is combining issues is definitely a big part of FPA's work. As Chia said, we're trying to link up with a lot of trade unions. But yeah, I take your point taken that we need to build more power, build more common interests, or recognize our common interests rather in building power. Thank you for that. Steve, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you. We've talked about so much, it's very difficult to know where to begin. As far as I'm concerned, money has no inherent value. There's nothing that it does for you that is any good. Essentially, you can't eat it, but you can eat food. You can live by being warm. You can live through love, and that's through interactions with other human beings and with the planet and with animals. Money isn't necessarily bad. It's neutral, but the way it's used as an instrument, the way it's instrumentalized by the people in control, means that effectively it is bad. That can be changed. Do we necessarily need money? Probably not, but we're too far away from thinking about an alternative at this moment. What about war? What about violence and cruelty? I mean, I think those negative emotions are at the heart of the cruelty, if you like, which is the instrumentalization of money through human beings, very powerful human beings, who instrumentalize most people on the planet. And they instrumentalize most people on the planet because they're almost robotic. Because to be instrumental, to treat human beings instrumentally, i.e., as a sort of negative, you have to be cruel. Cruelty is at the heart of war. Cruelty is at the heart of extractivism. Ruth said the despoliation of the earth. It's a very powerful expression, the despoliation of the earth. It's ruining the earth. It's corrupting the earth. It's raping the earth. It's hurting the planet, hurting the soil, hurting the potentiality of life. Women are hurt and treated as second rate because they're not as physically strong as men. And it's a sort of machismo, a sort of selfish machismo that dominates the planet. Migrants, are like women, are also treated as second-rate creatures. That's where nationalism takes a stranglehold of power. When actually what nationalism actually does, it separates, it alienates. And picking up on what Prem said finally, rendering the unfamiliar familiar. The stranger, the foreigner, the person who's regarded as a stranger, the person who's regarded as the foreigner is the unfamiliar. But really, we're all one family. And we have to break and transform this psyche of unfamiliarity so that the powers that have control, that divide and rule, that dissociate us from the earth, from animals, from migrants. Actually, they shouldn't even be called migrants. They're just fellow human beings. From women, they're breaking the relationship between men and women, damaging it. This unfamiliarity needs to be transformed into a family, into one family. And it's, to use a ridiculous word, because it's been made ridiculous, love is the answer. And love is not complex. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Steve. Do we have any final thoughts, questions, comments on this session?
I'm just sick of our government telling us, look at those people, to distract us from what's really going wrong here. The government are clearly hell-bent on using discrimination and all sorts of other nonsense to distract from what they're doing to us. We need to win a brighter future for everyone. I am sick of our mainstream media misinforming us, and I'm sounding like a broken record, but long story short, we need to win soon.
I couldn't agree more. Reinhard, and then Ruth.
Yeah, just a short follow-up question. I think it's particularly directed at Prem Sikka. I mean, as he is a labor lord, I mean, I'm being German living in this country, and I think one of the big problems is this first-past-the-post electoral system, which favors a tiny minority to sort of influence in the political system, and even drives the Labour Party, in my opinion, towards pleasing Murdoch and other billionaires rather than creating policies for the public, for everybody, and for poor people and just working people. Maybe, if you could comment, because I think you may have a lot of insight in what is going on in the Labour Party. Thank you.
Can I quickly reply?
Absolutely, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. The first past the post system creates all kind of problems, and I would like personally to replace it. But the problem is, even if you have a PR, there are many varieties of proportional representation. If those are really dominated by few political parties, would you really secure the kind of diversity you're looking for? Okay. Or do we need to look for something else? To me, democracy, okay, we need to reform the political system, but we need democracy at every level. I mean, in Germany, companies have worker-elected directors on boards. We don't in the UK. I would like to see the customers of utilities, whether it's water companies, rail companies, energy companies, I would like to see their customers elect directors to put on the boards of those companies. And I would like to see those customers empowered to vote on executive pay. Well, we won't then see water companies dumping sewage in the rivers, would we? Because their directors simply won't get paid. Want customers to be allowed to bring lawsuits, class lawsuits against the directors of water companies. So my view would be to empower people at various levels. I did a project for the previous Labour leadership under Jeremy Corbyn on how to deal with the regulatory systems. I met many regulatory bodies, and I always asked them one question: what is your prime function? They said it is to serve the people, as though somebody's written it down for them. And I said, where exactly is the public on your boards? Oh, we haven't got any. Well, why not? Why should they not have representatives of the people sitting on the boards? And then I suggested a version of the German two-tier board system for regulatory bodies, which was that let us have a supervisory board consisting of customers, employees, and others who watches over the regulatory board, executive board, for example, at water companies. And the supervisory board then hires and fires those executives and also watches over their pay and everything else. And I then went and did presentations in the City of London on that. It went down like a lead balloon. Nobody wants democracy. Nobody wants customers to be empowered. No, they were not really keen on employees being empowered, but happy to use this phrase of public accountability. So in a sense, democracy is far more just than first past the post system, though I agree that this system is not really very helpful in helping the people.
Thank you very much for that, Prem. Ruth, I'm going to let you come in, and I'm going to also let person named Save Central Hill refurbish, don't demolish. Just a quick note that we are getting to the end of the session, so if you wouldn't mind keeping it short. Ruth, after you.
I'm extremely short. Just wondering if Prem, if you could, because your talk had so many facts and figures in it, they're really useful, and I was scribbling, trying to write them down, but that's not going to be accurate. You must have it in writing. Could you share it with us?
I already sent them to Amal. I'm sure he'd be delighted to distribute.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll
and
make sure
Save
to share
Central
that.
Hill, I'm glad you're coming in. If you could, I put a note in the chat to you, hoping to get in touch about the situation with Lambeth housing estates, council housing, being heavily overcharged and threatened with eviction if they can't pay heat charges on communal heating. I don't know if that's Central Hills situation, but I thought you might have a way to help us reach more people in different estates, because I know you've done so much organizing.
Yes, thank you. Some of the residents on the estate are affected, but by and large, everyone tends to have their own heating. There are just pockets that have communal heating. The point that I wanted to make, which ties in very much with the person who spoke previously about customers actually being on the panel of boards, is that I went recently to a retrofit like conference event, Homes UK Net Zero, and when sorry about that, I've just nipped outside. And what I found is that when you actually walked around and you said, oh, I live on an estate and I'm interested in it being retrofitted, immediately the companies would say to me, oh, so well, what council are you? Well, go to the council, we can talk to them, because clearly you as a council estate resident are really interested. And I felt like, but I'm here, I'm a resident. So I felt like as a resident, I was not being, like, we're all resident led, we're all resident focused, but when it actually means getting a resident on board, it was still very alien. I felt like it was a concept they hadn't come across. The residents were in the agenda, but they weren't around the table. That's the point I wanted to make. And yeah, that's it. But that's all I wanted to say, is that as residents, it's still very top down to include residents, but not when the initiative is led by residents, it's still a very unfamiliar territory for councils and for these companies and for developers, because as residents, we need to move forward. We need to empower residents to go and seek the solution for their estates, for their housing, and not wait until the council come round to understanding what is needed, because they've wasted all our money. Lambeth, it's just come out in the news that they've reached £1 billion in debt now, half of it taken out in the past 5 years, and a lot of it to do with their house building company. Anyway, I shall pass over now, but thank you very much for listening.
Could you put your name and email address in the chat, or send it to me through the chat?
Yes.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Chia.
I just wanted to say, please do put your email in the chat so that we can reach out to you, because I'm sure at our next educational, we'd like to discuss some of the things you mentioned in more detail.
I put my email in the chat.
Thank you, Richard.
Yes, thank you for that, Chia. Indeed, the next session of Fuel for Thought will be on retrofitting, which is incredibly important to relieve fuel poverty, improve well-being, and reduce the impact of housing on the climate, which is what we're going to be talking about next time. So keep your eyes peeled for the session link, and yes, Save Central Hill. We would love to have you there. Yes, yeah, and I'll collect all the emails in the chat and add them to our mailing list. But if you RSVP to this event, you will already be included, so you'll definitely hear about that. I think it's a good time now to close the session. After that, so again, join on. Keep in your diaries the 18th of January for our session on retrofitting. If you missed the last session, you can watch it. There's a link there in the chat, which I hope works, which was on prepayment meters. And if you have any feedback, comments, questions, and ideas, you can email me on the email in the chat there, amric@fuelpovertyaction.com. Thanks again very much. Thank you very much again to Prem, Ben, Alex, Chia, and Erin in particular for speaking, and everyone else who joined. It was really wonderful having you. It'd be great if everyone could just unmute themselves, put their video on, say goodbye, give us a wave, and
thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's win this.
Thank
Bye-bye.
See you next time.